And a good Tuesday evening, everybody. Chris McDonald back with you for another broadcast of the Mac Files Network. And we're always grateful to see this gentleman, the one and only, the legend, the professor, not Marianne, but the professor, Nicholas Giordano, professor at Suffolk College up in New York. Buddy, it's good to see you tonight. PazReport.com is your website. And, man, I tell you, I've missed you. We always enjoy your insight, and I know that you've been in this hotbed up in New York. Not that y'all got any drama going on in New York City or anything like that, you know, but I thought we could get your insight of this crazy, nutty world called the Democrat Socialist Party and what they're believing and what they're thinking. I know there's no better source to sort all this mess out than you. It's good to see you tonight. How are you doing?
Always a pleasure to join you, Chris. I am doing well. Semester is about to begin, and I'm looking forward to getting back in the classroom.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's getting that time. I guess the kids down here, most of the kids down here started back to school, colleges, and I was telling my wife today, football season's 2 weeks away, and that's what we live for in the South. You know, we're grateful for football season. Professor, I wanted to ask you first tonight what your take is. We have seen one of the most radical movements in America arise, and suddenly, I don't think that any of us imagined. I knew that this was always sort of under the surface, that there were probably people in our country that felt the way some of these radical candidates did, but I didn't realize how mainstream this was becoming. And then I stopped for a minute and said, you know, we've been sort of seeing this in Congress, and we've been seeing this with these, like the Rashida Tlaibs and Ilhan Omar and other voices in Congress, and you've had this radical lieutenant governor elected in Virginia, and now you've got a Democrat socialist candidate in Michigan. You've got one in Texas that's running. You know, you've got AOC that's trying to sanitize it all. Bernie's out there, Grandpa Bernie, trying to be the cheerleader. But did you ever believe that we would be on the brink of a insurgency in the Senate and the House of this kind of radicalism? Because, but there's no other way to put this. These people are nuts. I mean, this is how we do
I think it was actually predictable. I mean, you know, we saw the groundwork be laid, and we could go back to, you know, around 2006, 2007, you had the Iraq war that wasn't going so well. Obviously, we had to put the surge in place before things started to calm down. And then right after that, you had the housing crisis. That's when the Occupy Wall Street movement started. That's when you saw the election of President Barack Obama, who wanted to fundamentally transform America. And as he got into office, the Democratic Party started to move toward the left. Now, first, it was a gradual move. It wasn't a radical shift that we're seeing today, but there was this movement where, you know, pro-life and pro-choice used to be normal positions that people would debate, you know, whether it was 12 weeks or 16 weeks. Well, what happened? Well, we started to see the Democrats start saying it's reproductive rights. And what started out as 12 weeks and safe, rare, and another word they use,
right,
turned into 24 weeks. Then it turned into 36 weeks. And then we started debating with Virginia Governor Ralph Northam that the idea of post-birth abortions. So we started to see this progression take place throughout the 2010s, and it only got worse. 2018, you had the election of Ocasio-Cortez. And she didn't hide who she was. She campaigned as a radical. She didn't self-identify as a socialist back then, but we saw with the Green New Deal. If anyone read the Green New Deal, and I encourage people to read it, it's still out there online. It's only about 14 pages long. I think there's about a page that talks about the climate. The rest of the Green New Deal is about economics and socialist economics and communist economics. So we started to see that progression. And also in that class of 2018, you got the Ilhan Omars, the Rashida Tlaibs, and they drove the party. Now, as this was happening, the moderate Democrats and the Blue Dog Democrats were virtually silent. You know, Nancy Pelosi kept a tight leash on everyone, and the party was unified in a sense, where they didn't deviate off script from what Speaker Pelosi at the time wanted. Then Pelosi gets older, Biden gets into office. Biden by all accounts, was senile. I mean, the guy had dementia. I have zero doubts about that. And that's when the left saw their opportunity. So as Democrats began to look and see what was going on in their party, they saw that people were gravitating towards the socialist message. Now, keep in mind, as all this is occurring, we have the collapse of the education system, where the education system is fundamentally broken. They don't teach critical thinking anymore, which is basically the most important part of education, pursuit of knowledge and critical thinking. Instead, they start dictating how students should believe, but they're not feeding students actual information. You know, students never really get taught in the K through 12 system about socialism or communism or even capitalism. You know, people think like these are subjects that are taught in the K through 12 system. They are not taught in the K through 12 system. So students don't really have a basis when we speak about these issues.
Great point.
And of course, the message of socialism is always appealing because our home's too expensive. Yes, in a lot of places they are too expensive. Well, we want to make them more affordable for you. We want to make your life easier. And I always do a little exercise with my students. And I say, propose that we have two candidates running for office. Candidate A says, listen, the United States is $40 trillion in debt. We're paying over $1 trillion in interest a year on that debt. We're bankrupting our future if we don't get it under control. So I'm going to slash every single budget in every single agency and department by 30%. And we're going to face some difficult times. And we're going to have to raise some taxes because we got to start generating a surplus to pay down that debt. And it's going to be a difficult period for maybe 5-10 years. But when it's all said and done, the United States will be fiscally solvent. The United States will be generating surpluses. Our debt will be reduced in half. And we will be a more prosperous country. And then candidate B comes along. And candidate B says, candidate A hates your children. He wants to cut 35% from the education system. He doesn't want your children to be able to read and write. Candidate A hates veterans. He wants to cut 35% of veterans' benefits. And those are people who sacrifice so much for this country, who even deserve more. He doesn't want to keep you safe at a time where you have a rising China. He's proposing cutting 35% from the defense budget to leave us vulnerable to China taking over the world and becoming a unipolar world that's led by a communist regime. And he wants to hurt you. He wants to raise your taxes and make you pay for these things. And who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? The majority of people are going to say, I'm going to vote for the person that says that they're going to make my life easier, right? I'm going to vote for the candidate that just said he hates everyone and wants to hurt everyone. And candidate B is also proposing to reduce taxes to help the hardworking middle-class families. He wants to spend more on education to invest in our children's future, to make sure that they could compete in the 21st century. He wants to spend more on defense to make sure that we're safe and secure here in the homeland. He wants to spend more for our veterans that have given so much. And so people will naturally gravitate towards candidate B, regardless if they're a Republican or Democrat, because that's how we're wired, to vote based on who is going to make our lives easier, rather than sitting there saying that we got to take some personal responsibility, that government cannot be the be-all, end-all. Instead, what the students are taught today is that the government is the answer to everything, that the government is the solution to the problems we face. You look at Mayor Mamdani's inauguration speech when he was elected into the mayor of New York City. What did he say? The warmth of collectivism is what's going to bring us together, and that government, there's no too big of a problem that the government can't take on. Well, I ask everyone, name me a problem the government has actually solved. Name me a problem. But yet people have been conditioned to believe that the government exists to provide for us, that the government exists to solve problems for us, when that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that the government exists to protect and ensure our rights. That's why the government exists. Our God-given liberties, so that nobody could try and take them away from us, and to have a national defense. That's the whole purpose of a central government, the federal government, and that's about it. And yet now this federal government is involved in everything because we've federalized every single issue that exists, because nobody knows what federalism is and the separation of the federal government and the state and local governments. And so now we're in this mess where this message of socialism is actually resonating. And when you ask these people, well, define socialism for me in a sentence or two, they cannot give you a definition of it. But if I ask someone that supports capitalism to define capitalism for me in a sentence or two, they can't define it either. So how can you defend what you don't know? And that's what we're witnessing today. And unfortunately, Republicans think just by screaming socialism and communism that that's going to help. That's not.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I see happening in Michigan with Rogers. I see it happening in Texas with Ken Paxton. They've got the message, but there's no energy. And I'm afraid that these kids, and I do want to ask you before I go on to this statement, is this where we have failed in education, that we've not taught the kids this? Or do you think that it would have mattered if they would have known this, that they still would have went with Canada Day? Because what you described is almost verbatim what you're seeing out there on that campaign trail in these races, because that is exactly, I watched Alcied last night on Jesse Waters, and Jesse Waters handed him his lunch. But there's a part of me that I was watching that interview, and I said, there's some Americans that are going to resonate, even though Alcied was crazy and he was talking about, trying to compare genital mutilation with circumcision, how he could make that crazy leap to compare that to. Only me and I don't think even God, so I'm not sure God even understands that one. But then, again, all these crazy communist manifesto, communist goal ideas that he had, have we failed that badly, this generation? Or where did this, you mentioned, does it start with Obama? Does it go back before him? Or has this stuff been going back to Nikita Khrushchev? When he told his professor, he said, we're not going to have to fire a shot on you guys. We're going to do this from within. And buddy, he's a prophet. We've witnessed this over 60 years.
Well, yeah, now I'll tell you about 60 years, because what happened in the United States, Karl Marx, first of all, let's be honest, the socialist and the communist of today never even read Karl Marx. So I'll state that already.
No, that's true.
But when we're looking at Karl Marx's argument was that the worker class is going to rebel. They're going to rise up, they're going to rebel, and then we'll have this, community of ownership, and the people own everything and they make all the decisions and blah, blah, blah. That message never resonated in the United States. Even the height of the McCarthy era, where we were really worried about communism, the message never resonated. And the reason the message never resonated was because the working class lives pretty good lives here in the United States. Mm-hmm. They're able to provide for their families. They're able to take a vacation a year. They're able to move up the social ladder. They're able to get promotions and raises. So the worker class rebellion was never going to happen in the United States. However, what the communists did is they decided to change it to cultural Marxism, right? Since we can't pit the worker against the proletariat class, what we're going to do is put the races against each other, put the different ethnicities against each other. And that's how we'll circumvent this. That's how we'll cause the division in the United States. And they have largely been successful, because we do see a lot of the cultural class where we thought we were making improvements when it came to race and race relations and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, Obama comes along. And my biggest disappointment with him was that he could have been the president that did the most when it came to moving past race in the United States. And yet he fueled the flames. I mean, he threw gasoline on the fire and made it 10 times worse. And so what the communist class did was they traded and made us become a tribal society. Now, tribal countries don't work out well. And I don't believe that the majority of people are socialist or communist here in the United States. But there are two things I fear. First is the amount of people that have simply disengaged from the political process. When we look at voter turnout, so the scope of participation in the United States is 100%. 100% of the American people could actually participate in the political process. Voting isn't the only way you participate. You could donate, you could intern for a campaign, you could volunteer for a campaign, you could do a letter writing to members of Congress, whatever it may be. So the scope of participation in the United States is 100%. But when we look at depth of participation, how many people actually get involved in politics? The easiest one to look at is the voting metrics. When we look at local elections, only 8 to 20% of the local population's turnout to vote in a local election. Now, local government's actually the most important government in your life because it has the most dramatic impact. It's what you face every single day. When it comes to statewide elections, if a governor's not on a ballot, it's usually about 25 to 40%. If a governor's on the ballot, maybe it gets up to 50%. Even presidential elections, it's only about 46 to about 58% of the American people that turn out and vote. And we're talking about voting eligible populations. And that's it. Our turnout is pathetic.
Yes,
so we've seen a number of people disengage from the political process. And then we've seen people that have gone through an academic system and they tend to believe that they're smarter than everyone else. And never in my life would I ever have thought in my own profession that I would have seen the day where the longer you're in academia, the dumber you actually get. Because that's the situation we're facing. And for the audience out there, I want to make this clear. We have the DSA membership numbers. So DSA in, I believe it was 2016, had about 16,000 members. That's it. Today, it's well over 190,000. It probably crossed over 200,000 since Mayor Mamdani got elected into office. And when you look at their membership, it's actually hysterical. 85% of DSA members hold a college degree, with the majority of that 85% holding beyond a bachelor's degree, meaning they have a graduate degree or a doctorate.
Wow.
When you look at the numbers, 80% of the DSA is white. Now, this is the same organization that's actually saying that they care about the working class, they're fighting for the workers, that the white man is bad, and that, we have to lift up minorities. And yet minorities have rejected the DSA. The people that don't have college degrees have rejected the DSA. So they're not fighting for those people. But the most dangerous thing is what the DSA is calling for. And they're calling for our Constitution to be completely dismantled. Now, do I believe that they are going to sit there and win this election cycle? And the answer is some DSA members will get into Congress. I don't think El Sayed is going to win in Michigan. At least I don't see that right now. Maybe things change. But what scares me is that Republicans aren't even mounting challenges against DSA candidates. So in my area, and I don't live in New York City, but in the 13th Congressional District of New York, that's part of New York City, you have Daraliza Chevalier that won under the DSA banner. This is someone that actually publicly stated that she didn't have a napkin, so she wiped her hands on the American flag. It's someone that was a co-founder to a student group at Columbia University that called for the destruction of Western civilization. So she is someone that routinely bashes the United States, calls for prisons to be shut down, all that. She's not even being challenged by a Republican in her district. The person that's running, I can't even recall the name off the top of my head, but basically he's like a ghost candidate. He's not a real Republican. His political issues are all over the map. Doesn't have campaign infrastructure, no campaign apparatus that's going out there. I have been warning Republicans for over a decade that they need to go into communities that they long surrendered to the Democrats and start making the case. You're not going to win over voters by ignoring them. You're not going to win over voters by not talking to them. So you need to go in. And I'm not saying Republicans can win in these deep blue areas, but slowly but surely, you'll start to gain votes. And over a period of time, then maybe you can win an election. Don't forget, New York used to have a Republican governor and a Republican mayor. And all we have to do is go back 26 years ago. If you look at California, they used to be controlled by Republicans. If you go to the 1960s and I believe the 1970s. So states and political parties do flip, but you're not going to gain new voters if you don't speak to the voters. Now, if the incumbent candidate that Chevalier was facing, if he won that primary, then Republicans may have an argument that Esteban or whatever his name was, he's been in office for 20 years, Democrats, it's a Democrat area. All right, we're not going to waste our time, money, and resources because obviously in campaigns, it's finite and you're limited. But the fact that a DSA candidate won, now's your opportunity to really challenge that candidate in these areas, especially knowing what the DSA makeup is. And that's where you start winning. But Republicans aren't doing that. And that's a fear I have.
Well, that is one of the worst indictments that we can have on our party, because you can't win an election you don't try to win, and that frustrates us out here in the public, Professor, and that does. And I mean, and I've been told this by another friend of mine, Helen Wee, who is in Brooklyn. She's running as a Republican in the Brooklyn district. And she told me almost exactly what you just said. She said, Chris, she said, it's so frustrating because, we can't get the Republicans to mount an argument. And if the populace, as you say, is only hearing one side, they're going to acquiesce to that side. And it is frustrating. The Republicans don't put up a greater fight in New York. It's almost like we've succeeded that to this movement in this country, and we've succeeded California to it. And I've been told over and over, that your state, my friend, out in the rural districts of this state is very, very conservative. Same thing with California. And it's very frustrating. I do want to ask you a question about the dynamics, and I got another question about something else. From what I'm hearing, this just ain't 20-year-olds that are buying into this stuff. These are college-educated white people that are maybe even in their 30s. Is that accurate, that this is not a young person thing? Because I hear this too. Well, it's just these young kids believe this, and it's just these young people. Well, Bernie Sanders is no young kid, Professor.
No, he's certainly not a spring chicken.
He's not a 20-year-old. And there's people in this country that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s that are embracing this nonsense.
Well, even 60, 70,
60 and 70 and 80, exactly.
Yeah, when we look at it, and that's the interesting dynamic, and most of these people are actually wealthy. They're actually successful. That's what makes it so bizarre. I've never seen a situation where someone was able to achieve the American dream, and then they slam the very system that allowed them to achieve the American dream. But that's exactly what we're seeing. So this is a movement that has been gaining steam, and there's big money behind it. Listen, the Democrats, and I'm talking about the real Democratic Party that we used to know in the 1990s, would not have tolerated what's going on today. They would have put a stop to it. What the DSA did, and I think that we really saw it when AOC got into office, and she challenged Speaker Pelosi. Like, one of the first things that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did when she got to Congress, she held a protest in Speaker Pelosi's office, and Speaker Pelosi was not pleased about that.
No.
What happened was she got blacklisted in Democratic circles. Basically, you don't challenge a sitting Speaker of the House. It has really bad ramifications, and so they piled on the work. She got punished because she didn't follow the unwritten rules of Congress. But what the socialist wing of the party did, they were smart. They said, you know what? We can't rely on the Democratic Party bosses. We can't rely on the Democratic apparatus. We can't rely on the Democratic fundraising machines. And so throughout the years, they've been building themselves out that framework that they could run it themselves. And they don't really need the Democratic Party. And that's exactly what you're witnessing. You look at someone like a Chuck Schumer. It seems he needs the DSA a lot more than the DSA needs him.
Great.
Because you see them kowtowing, and there's this sickness that exists, the TDS, the Trump derangement syndrome, where you have these ordinary, reasonable Democrats who despise Trump so much that they're sitting there saying, well, it doesn't matter if they're socialist or communist. We got to support them because Trump and Republicans are far worse. And that, to me, is where Democrats are in lockstep with each other. They are going to vote. When people say, well, the Democratic Party is finally standing up to the socialist wing of their party, that the House Democrats finally put together a pledge to fight this socialist push. Only 13 members of House Democrats signed it out of 200 plus members. So it seems that the takeover has happened. And again, I want to reiterate something. So I wrote an article for the Federalist a few weeks ago, an op-ed, and I also put out a podcast episode on the PAS Report podcast. People can check it out, about the oath of office. So when you are elected into office under Article 6 of our Constitution, every elected official is bound by an oath of affirmation to support the United States Constitution. The Democratic Socialists of America's platform calls for the abolition of the United States Senate. It calls to replace the presidency and the Supreme Court with offices that are subservient to a unicameral Congress, a unicameral House of Representatives. It calls for the elimination of checks and balances and separation of powers. The only way that platform works is if you destroy the United States Constitution, if you dismantle the United States Constitution. What I find interesting, and the question I raise, is how can the DSA candidates, if they are elected into office, how can they actually be seated? Because they cannot take that oath to support and defend the Constitution. And if they can't take that oath in good faith, should they be seated? Remember, the oath of office is given before a single official exercises any government power. Do you think there's a reason the founding fathers made the oath come first?
Exactly
and then
right.
You get into the government office? Now, people will push back, and there's two cases that exist in the Supreme Court. There's the Powell case, and they'll say, well, the Supreme Court already ruled on it. But the Powell case was about misconduct. It wasn't about the actual oath of office. And then there was another case, I can't recall off the top of my head, but that case was a case where a person basically had an opposing viewpoint of the Vietnam War. Republicans allege that since they opposed the Vietnam War, they can't take the oath of affirmation. They wouldn't be loyal to the Constitution. No, that was a First Amendment issue, right? You can literally have differing opinions on the political issues. That's a First Amendment issue. Nobody has ever challenged the actual oath of office, that if someone either belongs to an organization or is campaigning on the idea that we should abolish the Senate, get rid of the presidency and the Supreme Court, destroy checks and balances, remove the separation of powers, well, maybe that person shouldn't be seated. And if Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, wants to energize Republicans, maybe he should say, well, elections are important and who wins elections are important. But at the same time, we can't in good faith seat someone that is calling for the dismantling of our Constitution of the United States.
Well, I think President Trump is good have said that here a few months ago. He said that he was not going to allow these commies to take over the government, and I seem to believe that he sort of alluded to what you're referring to. You know, you had the lieutenant governor, professor, just when she took her oath several months ago, she didn't even put her hand on the Bible, but she didn't put her hand on anything. And when these people do this, I think it's not just about the optics of that, but it's like you say, if they're not going to take an oath to uphold our Constitution, I'm sorry, you don't get to make policy regarding our Constitution, and you don't get to make policy that affects millions and millions of people because they're in Congress. We're talking the federal level of government and the lieutenant governor. But, you know, AOC did that. Rashida Tlaib did that. Ilhan Omar did that. All of these people in there. And I think that once we let them get away with it, I think it's become harder now to make that case, even though I'm with you 1,000,000%. I think that's exactly what Mike Johnson should do. And I think he should put these people on notice. My question to you is this, though, and it gets complicated because, look, I remember when AOC came on the scene, people were warning us. I had friends in Australia warning me. They watched her from afar. And a dear friend, he called me up one day and he said, listen, he said, you need to remember this name, Alexandria Cortez. And he said, she is a hit down here, down under. And I said, what do you mean? He said, she's cooking cookies, baking chocolate chip cookies in her kitchen, and she's spewing nothing but socialist dogma. And these kids are eating her up, and they just love what she's got to say. And he said, don't be surprised if she's not the next senator from New York, or at least a representative. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. It was right around 2018 when all this was going on. My question to you is, do you think this sanitizing act that she's doing is going to really befuddle people and believe that she's not as radical now as she was then? Because, buddy, I'm seeing polls out there tonight that she's on top of the Democrat ticket for 28. And I know people have been laughing this off for about 10 years now, saying, oh, she'll never make national waves. I wouldn't be so sure. I didn't think
Well, listen,
Nixon. I didn't think Nixon would win in Florida, but I tell you what, I didn't. I didn't like Vindman. I couldn't stand Vindman. I was glad to see him get whipped and get his butt whipped. But I would have rather it been a little more or less crazy than Angela Nixon that did it. Just
well,
saying.
I think it was Shakespeare that said all of politics is theater, and he was right. I mean, when you look at AOC, when you look at Mamdani, even when you look at Trump to a certain degree, it is about theater, right? It's about
Right. I'll
theatrics. It's
agree.
about making people
Totally
feel
agree.
something and connecting with the voter. And that comes with you have to be talented to do that. I've been warning Republicans for a while now. Do not underestimate someone like an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Do I think that she has the brain capacity and is one of those bookworms that really understands the minutia of policy and goes through the details or anything like that? No, I don't. She's not someone like a Jeb Bush, right? A Jeb Bush was a policy wonk.
Sure.
AOC
Exactly.
is not a policy
Exactly.
wonk. But to win an election, you don't have to be a policy wonk. You have to
don't.
be more likable. You have to be more affable. So just to give you an example with AOC, Congresswoman, a few weeks ago, she was talking about freezing her eggs, and she publicly like gives herself this shot and everything. And Republicans jump on top of her about, oh, she should get married and have kids, or this is all political show and blah, blah, blah. Republicans should have just ignored it. Like, why are you going to bash her if she's freezing her eggs and wants to have children in the future? Don't bash her on it. That's not going to win you any points. People are going to look at that and be like, well, you attack her on policy, on where she stands on the issues, attack her on support of the Democratic Socialists. When you look at someone like a Mayor Mamdani, this was going back about a month ago.
Come on.
It was a hot day in New York City. And so with a bunch of kids, he jumped in the pool in his suit. And Republicans were like, oh, look at how ridiculous he looks. No, that doesn't make him. I mean, to me, it's ridiculous. I would never jump in a pool with a suit on. But for the optics of it, it looks like he's this jovial guy that he's, making the kids laugh and everything. These people are talented, and you underestimate them at your own peril. Now, historically, Republicans were already up against the wall in a midterm election. Since the end of World War II, so you're talking, 80-something years, the party of the president has gained seats in only 2 election cycles. Think about that logically. So in the last century, just about, only 2 election cycles has the party in power in the presidency gained seats. In 1998, Bill Clinton was one. Democrats gained seats in the House and the Senate. And the reason that they gained seats was because of the impeachment backlash against Republicans.
Correct.
And then in 2002, George W. Bush gained seats following 9/11 and his leadership during that difficult time. So Republicans were already hitting a brick wall. And history is not on Republicans' side. Now, Republicans actually had a chance. I mean, they still have a chance, right? They did the redistricting. That certainly helps Republicans to a certain degree where it limits losses. The problem Republicans face is they could only lose a handful of seats, and then they lose control of the House of Representatives. And that's the disaster Republicans are facing, because not only are the Democrats energized and motivated because it's an off-year election, you don't have a president on the ballot, they despise Trump so much, he is the only thing they need to go down to the polls. Like, we know that 100% of the Democratic Socialists are going to the polls. We know that every single person that goes to a No Kings rally, if you're going to waste your time protesting on a Saturday, you're going to the polls in November, or you're doing your mail-in ballots, whatever it may be. But Republicans haven't given their voters something to vote for.
That's exactly right.
Yes, President Trump did secure the border, but that was a year ago. And nobody's voting based on Trump's success on the border a year ago. We as Americans look at the here and now. We have very short-term memories. We don't remember how bad the border was under Biden. Now that Trump solved it, it's a non-issue. So he can't use that. The tax cuts were passed a year ago. What have the Republicans done since? And not for nothing, they haven't codified any of the rules that Trump changed with the border to make sure no future president can undo it. But also, you look at things like the SAVE Act. Well, they dragged their feet on the SAVE Act, an issue where 83% of Americans support voter ID. Okay, I get it. Democrats are not going to support the SAVE Act. And to get things through the Senate, you do need a 60 vote threshold. Okay, so then just every single day put out just a voter ID bill. You don't have any, not the SAVE Act, just put out a voter ID bill. Make Democrats vote against that, where 83% of the American people actually support voter ID requirements. When it comes to the budget, a lot of people, including myself, had high hopes with this administration, with the whole DOGE initiative, that Republicans were finally, they campaigned on fiscal responsibility for decades. They're finally going to get serious. They're finally going to cut budgets. And what happened? Well, the budgets swell. The budgets continue to grow. I mean, we're still spending at pandemic levels. We haven't returned to pre-pandemic spending levels as per a part of our GDP. Where's the Republican proposal to show, even though Democrats aren't going to support it, I'm not naive, I understand that, but if you have a proposal that shows, hey, Republican voters, we have this proposal, here it is, you can read it yourself, it's like 5 pages, and we're going to cut the budget here, 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 and here, and we're going to bring it back to the pre-pandemic levels, and we're going to have a balanced budget, and you put that on paper, well, now you're giving something for Republicans to vote for, not just Republicans, but fiscal independents, fiscally conservative independents as well. You make the argument. Democrats have voted against this. We put the proposal to them several times. They voted against this. And so you have to elect more Republicans into the Senate so that we could pass it and make sure that we get on a path to fiscal responsibility. But they haven't done that. The Iran war. Listen, I understand the threats of the Iranian mullahs. I am someone that is not naive. I actually did my master's thesis in college on Iran. I understand the country very well. And I am someone that is not afraid to use force. But I am also someone that believes when you're using military force, you either fight to win or you don't fight at all.
Come on.
Okay. And my biggest problem is that now we're in this situation where people see the gas prices, they're unhappy. You can't have a president that comes out there every day and says, well, we're close to a deal is made, we got in principle, an agreement, and then all of a sudden Iran lobs off a few missiles a few hours later. It doesn't work politically. The optics of that are terrible. Now, I don't know if Trump pulled back because he's worried about the midterm elections. But if you didn't dilly-dally this whole time, maybe you could have made some headway.
Totally
and again, I recognize war is brutal. War is ugly. War is death and destruction. And I understand the consequences of it. It's why a president of the United States has to make the case to the American people before he engages in conflict with another country. President Trump never made that case. Now, if he succeeded and it went well and it was over and done with and it worked to our advantage, 80% of the American people would have loved it and said it was a great idea. But because we're in this stalemate, because we don't really know what's going on, only 30% of the American people actually support it. And I think President Trump did underestimate how entrenched the Iranian government was.
I do too.
I believe that Trump looked at it off the heels of Venezuela, saying that we'll be able to pick the mullahs off quick. That's going to topple the regime. But again, this is something in January. I did a whole podcast episode when we started to see the Iranian protests. I said, this government is fully entrenched because what I am witnessing is we haven't seen a single high-level defection of an Iranian government official.
That is so true.
When an Iranian regime, when a regime, any government regime, is about to collapse, normally you'll see ambassadors begin to defect, military officials will begin to. We didn't see that with Iran. Why? Because these people are devout in their beliefs. They are willing to die for their cause. And the political class of Iran that Trump is talking to that may want an agreement, they're irrelevant. They don't have the power. The IRGC is the one with the power. And so Iran is going to drag down Republicans in the midterm election. Now, the only silver lining for Republicans is that you do have the crazy socialist Democrats, the hostile takeover. That gives them a golden opportunity. But screaming socialism and communism is not a winning message. You have to give voters something to vote for.
You just answered my question, because that's what I was going to ask you after this wonderful discussion you just had. Everything you say I agree with, and I was going to ask you, do you think that the Republican strategy now because of everything you just laid out. I think they know it. They see it. That they're hoping that it is going to be, well, okay, we suck as a party, but the Democrats want to carry you back to Bolshevik Russia in 1917. So if you elect the Dems, you're going to wind up in a gulag. Elect us, we're still going to suck. We just won't suck as bad as the Democrats. And see, Professor, I'm with you 1,000,000%. That you can only scream that so much. And I see Rogers doing that in Michigan. And I got to ask you about Rogers, about something before I forget. Am I right on that, though? Is that what you feel like they're doing? I just think
right.
that that's exactly what they're doing.
And telling people that, yeah, we just suck a little bit less than the other side. It's not the most inspiring message.
Not the most inspiring message.
That wasn't what Reagan was preaching about in the 70s and 80s in the rise of the Republican Party.
No, it was not. I saw an article the other day, and I don't know how accurate it is. And Mark Levin, though, who I respect a great deal, he retweeted this, and I want to get your opinion about it. Aides to Mike Rogers. AIPAC, which is, of course, the Jewish lobbying group that supports, different candidates and all. They spent over $30 million on ads against Al-Sayed. And Rogers people, for some dumb reason, he started using, Al-Sayed began to say, well, they're backing Rogers, so, and again, this whole movement's anti-Semitic to begin with, so this was just fodder for them. And I think Rogers made a terrible mistake, if this is reportedly true, that he is now going to take AIPAC money because he don't like the optics of it, and he don't want Al-Sayed using it in a commercial against him. And I want to tell Mike Rogers, dude, do you not think that it doesn't matter who you get your money from? Al-Sayed is going to call you every name, and he's going to be like candidate A in your or candidate B in your student thing. He's going to call him every name in the book. And I just think it's a mistake that you let the other candidates spook you into taking money from somebody that can help your campaign. And I watched him the other night, and it's in Paxton. I feel the same way about in Paxton because they're facing similar candidates. They gotta up their energy, Professor. They've got to get up there, and like you said, they gotta give us a reason to vote for them. I'm not from Michigan, but these Michiganders, they got a huge choice in November. Texas has got a choice. In my mind, I'm trying to convince myself that, as you just said, these other two are so nutty and crazy. And listen to this man last night on Jesse Waters. I mean, man, I'm telling you, genital mutilation, healthcare for all, destroy ICE, destroy police. He dodged so many questions. I think the best part of that interview was Dana Loesch after him coming on and busting his interview to pieces. But I don't think the Republicans win with this, and I don't think Rogers is making a good decision on this because you can't let your opponent dictate this, and they're playing right into their trap. Because
we'll see.
Am I right on that?
But that's been the problem with the Republican Party for a long time. A lot of people, have a running joke that Republicans are right on all the policy issues, but they're terrible at communication and campaigning. People want courage.
Right.
They want courage of conviction. Okay, so Al-Sayed is going to paint Mike Rogers as a pro-Israel candidate anyway. So it doesn't really matter.
That's true.
Okay, whether he takes the money or not. Have courage. Stand up.
Come on.
And sit there and say, yeah, Israel is our ally. I'd much rather Israel. We have more in common with Israel than a lot of these other nations that we're dealing with, particularly in the Middle East, who are abusive to their own people, who have engaged in massive, gross human rights abuses. If you show courage, people will stand behind you. You'll inspire them. They'll volunteer for you. They'll campaign for you. They'll talk to other people about you. But when you show weakness, when you try and appease all these different groups, then you're not going to be successful. And we've actually seen Trump showing courage, and look at what he's able to achieve. He's able to build these broad coalitions that don't really make a lot of sense in a lot of ways, but they somehow work, where candidates like Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, even Joe Biden, what did they do? They pandered to each group they spoke to. They tried to be anything and everything to everyone, and that doesn't work. So To me, you got to show courage. You have to show energy, and you have to show that you have proposals, realistic proposals.
Absolutely.
Again, on my podcast, I did the new contract with America, 3-part series, 10 things that every single Republican candidate could go on pasreport.com right now. They could take it from there. They do not have to give me credit at all. They don't have to mention my name at all. I'm not cocky and arrogant. Take it and use it and run on it for your own platform.
Come on, buddy.
And people will look at that and they'll say, wow, he's got plans. He's got a proposal. These are real ideas. These are ideas that we could get behind. And that inspires it. But sitting there saying, well, I'm not going to take money from this group because my candidate's going to attack me. Your candidate's already going to attack you.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Listen, we got about 10 or 15 more minutes. I won't keep you much longer. I want to thank you for being with us on this Tuesday night. I really do. Couple of things. I asked another guest we had on a few weeks ago about this, and they were a political person, and then I'm going to ask you a question about 9/11. We'll wrap it up. Do you think that this TDS syndrome, Trump is only going worst case scenario for the Dems? He's here 2 years. I mean, Trump's here for 2 years. We got another president coming in 28 on the Republican side. As what we just described on the Republican side, that the Republicans can't just keep saying socialism, communism is evil, 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 elect us because we're not as evil. Does this work on the other end of this spectrum too with the Dems at some point, that they too have not made any proposals? Their only campaign slogan is Trump is evil. But again, at some point, Professor, he's not going to be here. And my question to the guest was, do you think the temperature in this country goes down after Trump, or are we going to find out that it was never about Trump? It's these people just want to destroy our Constitution and our nation. Because I have to tell you, my money's on the platter. I don't think it's about Trump. I don't think it's ever been about Trump.
I'll tell you this right now. So first of all, the only part of the Democratic Party that's actually putting out proposals are the actual socialists. Democrats do not have a platform.
That's right.
It's only the socialists that actually have a platform.
Bingo.
And that's why they're taking over that party. That's why people are gravitating to the socialist message, because in theory, it sounds wonderful. Now, as far as Trump goes, Democrats have deluded themselves. And this is why they ended up losing in 2024, because the argument, well, Trump is bad, Trump is a criminal, Trump is a felon, it didn't work anymore. People were tired of it. And you didn't give people anything to vote for. In fact, Kamala Harris said, when asked, is there anything that you do differently from President Biden? She said nothing at all. Now, to get to your question, what is it going to look like in a post-Trump world? I mean, this is the amazing part. He's been like this central figure in the minds of so many for so long, particularly Democrats that suffer from TDS. And I always explain, America's much bigger than just one person.
It is.
Like, if America could rise and fall with one person, we don't deserve to survive as a country.
That's a great point.
Here's the thing. Every single name that they've thrown at Trump, every single label that they've put on Trump, they did the same thing to Ronald Reagan. They did the same thing to George H.W. Bush. They did the same thing to George W. Bush. They did the same thing to Senator John McCain. They called Mitt Romney a racist and a misogynist, and that he wanted to put black people back in chains. So now, if you notice the pattern, now the Democrats say, oh, George W. Bush, actually, he was pretty good. We could deal with a Republican like that. But at the time, he was Hitler. He was a Nazi.
So
he was a fascist. And so whoever the Republican is in 2028, whether it's Rubio, whether it's J.D. Vance, whether it's Ron DeSantis of Florida, whether it's some unknown dark horse that we're not even thinking about right now, I will guarantee you, I will bet you that at some point, Democrats will call that candidate a racist, a misogynist, an Islamophobic, and whatever other ist you want to add to it.
You answer my question. That's what I feel. I'm with you. No, 1,000,000%. I do. I've always felt like this was not just about Trump. They've made it Trump, but it's not Trump. But that's where we Republicans and conservatives had better get our head out of the sand and realize that this is the war we're fighting. This is what we're fighting.
The only reason they hate Trump more is because Trump uses their tactics against them.
And he's not scared to give it back.
A Republican would never speak like Trump and take in the fight to the Democrats the way Trump has.
I'll agree
so that's
with that.
why they despise him so much.
That's why we love him so much out here, to be frank with you. One final question, buddy. We got the 25-year anniversary of 9/11. coming up here in a few weeks, and it's a very solemn day for this country. I was just north of you there in New Hampshire when all this happened. I was traveling. I was 800 miles from home, and 9/11. For those of us that care about this country, we will always remember where we were, just like a lot of people older than us remember where they were the day Kennedy got shot. And from your perspective, have we learned any lessons 25 years later? And I almost can answer that myself, being that we've got a Muslim mayor over the city where all this happened, who backs the ideology that brought those towers down. But have we come any further 25 years later? And what's your thoughts about this as you're up in that state, and and what's your thoughts about this? I think that it's a time for introspection, and we better take some serious looks at our conscience as a country, because I'm going to tell you, my friend, I'll repeat the echoes of even George W. Bush, and people can think what they want to about him. Look, I thank God every day and twice on Sunday we didn't have Al Gore in office when this happened. I know
I agree.
Bush had his problems, but I'm going to tell you something. I respected George W. Bush. I know he got sort of crazy and Clinton-like at the end, and that really did not help matters. But I do believe the man led the country during a time that without his leadership, there's no telling where this country would have been. And I know people that just have got an axe to grind with everything. They don't like to hear that, but I'm different. But I don't think we've come any further. In fact, I'm afraid we went back and we've forgotten what that day felt like for this country, buddy. And Professor, I'm going to tell you something. We don't need to forget it, because it can happen. It's not going to be if, but when this happens again, I don't know if we can survive it with this generation of kids and this generation of people that are believing that communism is good, socialism is good, and electing a Muslim mayor to New York City is good. Buddy, I don't know about this nation. I'm a little concerned about things 25 years later. What's your thoughts on that? We'll wrap it up.
Well, everyone should be concerned, because what was supposed to be never forget has been forgotten. And in a lot of ways, the Islamic radicals actually succeeded in what they wanted to do. We can look back in hindsight, and I understand it's easy in hindsight, but following 9/11, Americans made a major compromise, a compromise that never should have taken place. We've traded away some of our liberty to have this idea of safety and security. And as Benjamin Franklin said, when you're willing to do that, you deserve neither. But when you look at the Patriot Act, when you look at the Department of Homeland Security, when you look at the expansion of the intel apparatus over at the FBI, we gave up a lot following 9/11.
We sure did.
And the fact that we forgot that day and what it was about and how we felt that day, it shows that we didn't live up to our principles and our commitments. Even worse, we actually encouraged, in the name of not looking as if we're Islamophobic, we actually opened up the floodgates. And so that's why you get an ungrateful mayor of New York City who had us a great story. A family came over from Uganda. They achieved the American dream. He achieved, when did he become a citizen? Like 8 years ago? And now he's mayor of New York City. Like, that's a fascinating story he could tell. Instead, every single time he talks about 9/11, what does he talk about? He doesn't talk about the victims. He doesn't talk about the towers going down and the lives lost. He talks about American foreign policy and that's to blame. He talks about how his aunt, who didn't even live in the United States, has never been to the United States, was racially profiled because she wore a hijab on a subway that she was never on. And he's routinely bashing the United States, even in his July 4th messaging. But the most terrifying thing to me is a study that was conducted 2 years ago. I wrote an article about this, where 30% of younger Americans, Gen Z, believes that Osama bin Laden was actually a force for good and had the right ideas. And that to me is frightening. And just today, I was reading an article on the Washington Examiner, how a school in California, I forget the actual district, I want to say Montgomery, but that may be the wrong district, but a school in Alabama, they have to teach these ethnic study classes, the critical race theory classes. Well, one of the classes actually brings up Osama bin Laden's letters to America and justifies his grievances against the United States for things that we've done inside the Middle East and blah, blah, blah. That's being taught to children. So, yeah, we failed as a country following 9/11. When we look back 25 years ago and where we are today, and this is the crap that's being taught to kids. And where's the outrage?
There's none, and that scares me. That scares me. And you just described, and these families, I feel like, are justified in their anger not wanting him at that memorial, and
Yeah.
it's a disgrace. As I said, 25 years later, that somebody's in power in this great city of New York, that where these towers came down and the Pentagon getting hit and the plane in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that are all testimonies to radical Islamic jihadism. And
And
Professor,
I just want to make one thing clear. When we look at my generation, Gen X, 30% of Gen Xers, when we were younger, didn't believe that the Japanese were right at Pearl Harbor, and that it was our own fault.
that's very
Okay.
true. That's
So
a good
I,
point.
I want to make it clear that this is something that's very new in our society, where you have a whole bunch of people that have been born to believe their own country is inherently bad, their own country is inherently evil. And yet these are the people that are going to become the teachers, going to become the police officers, going to become the business leaders, the policy makers. And they've been taught to despise the country they come from. That's not a good recipe for the future.
Not at all. And I'll say this as we close tonight. No matter how the left wants to do it, and no matter how the media tries to do it, and no matter what anybody says, you cannot sanitize the fact this was a Islamic jihadist attack on this country and that religion. We don't hate Muslims. We don't hate the people, but the religion, the ideology, the theology behind this. This is a religion. You mentioned Iran a while ago. This is what makes them so dangerous. If somebody's willing to die for a cause, when you threaten them with death, they sit there and laugh at you and they say, well, bring it on. We don't care. Well, buddy, I'm going to tell you something. This is who we're embracing right now. And this culture of death is seeping quickly in our society. Oh, I could go on, but I've kept you an hour tonight, and I wanted to thank you again. Listen, please come back soon. And now, if you see if you're looking out over your class and you see like a desk and you see some gray hair like about this wide, and you're like, what in the living world? Who is that sneaking into my class that's got white hair? Please don't call the Suffolk police. That's me trying to glean from all the knowledge of Professor Nick Giordano. I hope to see you next time up to New York and fellowship with you, buddy. It's been a pleasure tonight. Thank you so much for being with me. Listen, I'm going to say goodnight to these people, and please come back, and thank you again for being with us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
PazReport.com, and I encourage people to go there. Professor, have a good night. Thank you so much. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Professor Nicholas Giordano, everybody. That is a good man right there. And I tell you, this is, I'm going to put this up as one of the top 5 interviews of the year. I pray that you'll go back, share this out, replay it. What you heard tonight, folks, is the absolute best summary of where we're at in this country I've heard all year, to be frank with you. And what we're up against, and why it's important that we get out and vote, and what we're facing on this coming 25-year anniversary of 9/11. And I do encourage you to go to PAS.com, PASreport.com, and please do that, and it will help you understand this. And those articles that he wrote will help you, encourage you. I think this is the top 5, or I'm not so sure they're in the top one or 2 this year. And I always look forward to the professor. I always look forward to him. And he hit a grand slam tonight. He just didn't hit a home run tonight. This is a grand slam. And folks, I pray you take what he said at heart. We're not fighting. This is not a youth movement. This DAS movement is not a youth movement. This is a ideology. And this is a movement to undermine the very foundation of government, the Constitution. And I say this screaming and kicking to the Republicans. You better up your game. And we don't have James Akers on tonight. But I'm telling you, I'm very concerned that what he said about the optics. And look, there's not one single thing on that platform that Al-Sayed was talking about last night with Jesse Waters, folks. He was literally telling Jesse Waters that to him, because Jesse point blank asked him, he said, well, do you agree with genital mutilation on kids? Well, that should have been a no right there. He should have just said no. Well, instead of that, Al-Sayed basically countered that in the most demonic way you can counter. He said, well, Jesse, he said, have you been circumcised? And he ties it into a Jewish practice of sanitation. It's just something the Jews have always believed. God actually ordained that practice, going all the way back to the Old Covenant. But that's how they do this. They are very, very sneaky, very deceptive, very they lie, they twist, and it is a very deceptive spirit, but it deceives people into believing a lie. And so forth. So we're in a war here, and we better get serious, and we better get sober very quickly. Very quickly. And the Republicans had better understand that they just can't say communism is evil and people are just going to throw their hat in the ring and go vote Republican. There will be some that will do that. But I'm going to tell you something, folks. These Dems are serious. They're not going to betray. Look, Chuck Schumer out there yesterday is basically saying he's all in with Al-Sayed and all the DAS. He don't feel anything that's wrong with it. And his comment was they brought energy to the party. And the truth of the matter is they have. They have. And you heard Professor. At least they got a platform. Republicans can't even say that. And when you've got feckless leaders like John Thune, who really should have been voted out 6 months ago and sent packing and go back to South Dakota and pound sand, we've got a feckless Senate leader and a feckless House leader that all they do is get on Fox every now and then and make some kind of push and excuse while they're not doing nothing. And folks, everything that Trump has done, everything that President Trump has signed in the executive order, if this election goes bad in 28, we get a Democrat president, they're going to reverse everything and turn everything back, and we'll be right back to where we were in 2020. And I don't think anybody wants that, but I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in 28, and I had a friend of mine tell me this. It's going to be worse in 28 because Trump has ticked the Democrats off. And their hatred for him and us who support him has tripled. They were already mad at us in 2020, but their hatred and their vitriol and their commitment to destroying us is going to be like 6 times worse if they take power in 26 or 28. So we need some serious people who've got a sober mind and a vigilant mind and an understanding of what we're fighting against. And the wherewithal to understand that communism is evil and socialism is evil. And Islamic jihadism wants to kill you and cause you to either submit or die. And there's no tolerance, and there's no tolerance from that side to this side. You either submit to it or you're dead. And it's evil. And they want you dead and your children dead. They want Sharia law. We're going to have a show on Sharia law next week, one night, I think, of just talking about Sharia law, what it is, what it means. We're trying to find somebody to talk about that. But I want you to listen to me tonight as a close on this show tonight. We better get out and vote. You better make 100%, 1,000% sure that you're voting, and you better be ready. You better be ready. And it's time. It's time for us to be serious and get serious. All righty. Peggy Cornish, good to see you back tonight. She says, yeah, well, so good. Yes, it was very good. Be sure to like the video and be sure to share it out. We've got more to say about this. We've got Leslie coming up tonight. We won't be on late tonight. We'll be 11 o'clock, 11:15, because we got these election results. We won't keep you long tonight for the late show, but please come back and be with us tonight. We got some other things to share. And I could talk on, but I need to take a break here. Listen, God bless you. God bless your families. God bless this great nation of America. I encourage you, pasreport.com, and like and go to that website. And if you do, there's a contact button to Professor's email. Send him an email and let him know that you heard him tonight on the Mac Files and let him know how much you enjoyed him. He will appreciate that, and so will we. And we thank you for being with us tonight on a Mac Files Tuesday night. I tell you what, folks, this is a grand slam, wasn't it? That's some good stuff. I'm going to go back and listen to it again. So if you do it, I'll go do it. because I think we all need to hear it again. He made some excellent points, and I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. God bless you out there. We'll be back to talk about the elections in South Carolina with Lindsey Graham's sister and some other news from today. God bless you all out there. Have a good night. We'll see you back here later.